Let's go back in time. The year is 2008. The first iPhone is barely a year old. A huge financial crisis is just starting to hit, and the top intelligence analysts in the US are trying to peer into the future. Our future, the world of 2025. Today, we're opening up their time capsule. It's a report called Global Trends 2025, and we're going to see how the world they imagined compares to the one we're living in right now.
Now, this whole thing wasn't about having some magic crystal ball. The guy in charge, C. Thomas Fingar, made it really clear. He said the goal was to stimulate strategic thinking. They were looking at all the big forces, globalization, demographics, climate change, you name it, and trying to figure out how they would all crash into each other and shape our world.
And here's what's so wild. You have to see how much their thinking changed in just a few years. The report looking at 2020 predicted that US dominance would just keep going. But by 2008, they saw something completely different, a multipolar future. Basically a world where America wasn't the only big player on the block anymore. That's a huge, huge shift in perspective. So this brings us to their first massive prediction, what they called the Great Global Rebalancing. They were basically forecasting the end of a world run by a single superpower, and the beginning of something way more complex. So who did they think the new players on the world stage were going to be? Well, they looked right at the BRIC nations. But this wasn't some simple, everything's going to be great prediction. For China, they saw a potential perfect storm of problems brewing. They described India's rise as complicated, with a focus on just staying independent. Russia, they said, was on a boom-or-bust roller coaster tied to oil prices, and Brazil looked like it was gearing up to be a major leader in its own neighborhood. And this quote right here, it just nails their main takeaway. The era of one country dominating everything? Over. They said the power gaps between the US and everyone else were shrinking, and that was going to create a whole new and much less predictable ballgame. Okay, so you've got this new world order taking shape. But it's not just about who has the power. It's also about what everyone is fighting over. The report was really clear that a shortage of basic resources was going to be a major source of conflict and change for everybody.
First up, and this is a big one, water. They projected that by 2025, a jaw-dropping 1.4 billion people would be living in places with serious water shortages. That's more than double the number from when they wrote the report.
And that pressure cooker effect went from our taps to our dinner tables. The report predicted that the world's demand for food would shoot up by 50%. And that's not just because of more people, but because the new middle class in places like China and India was starting to eat more meat and other foods that take a lot of resources to produce. And what about energy? Well, they could see that the age of oil was ending, but they were also realists. They predicted that even with cool new tech, a real energy transition would be painfully slow. Why? Well, think about it. You've got trillions of dollars of infrastructure to replace, and historically, it takes about 25 years for any new energy source to really catch on.
All right, so we've talked about countries and resources, but what about people? Us. The report dug deep into how our changing populations and social dynamics would totally reshape the world of 2025.
And wow, this map really tells the story, doesn't it? The top one is the world back in 2005. The bottom is their projection for 2025. Just look at how much bluer it gets. The blue represents older populations, and you can see it spreading all across Europe, Russia, and China. Meanwhile, the red, which means younger populations, stays concentrated in Africa and the Middle East. So this creates two totally different problems brewing in different parts of the world. In the West, in Japan, you get a pensioner boom, which puts huge stress on healthcare and social security. But in what they called the arc of instability, you get these massive youth bulges, tons of young people with not enough jobs, creating a perfect recipe for unrest. But it wasn't all doom and gloom on the people front. They pointed to one hugely optimistic trend. The report predicted that as women gain more economic and political power, it could be one of the single most transformative forces in the world, leading to better governments and more stable society overall. So, that's the data, the trends, the big ideas. But to make it all feel real, the analysts did something I think is just brilliant. They wrote stories from the future, fictional scenarios to show what living in this new world might actually feel like. Let's check out 4 of them. Our first story comes from a pretty high-level source, a U.S. president's diary, dated October 1st, 2020. And the topic? A monster hurricane that slams into New York City, right in the middle of a big UN meeting. The diary entry is just devastating. This isn't some abstract climate model.
This is them imagining a world where the consequences of climate change are right on our doorstep, shaking the public's trust and forcing the world to finally deal with it. The next story jumps to 2015. It's a letter from the head of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Think of it as an Eastern Bloc with China and Russia. In this future, the West has stumbled, and powers like China and Russia have no choice but to step up and fill the power vacuum.
I mean, listen to that. An organization that started out as the Organization of Mutual Distrust becomes as powerful as NATO? It's a really stark vision of that multipolar world they predicted, where new alliances form because the old powers just aren't running the show anymore.
This third one is a little different. It's framed as a newspaper article from September 2024. And it explores a future where power doesn't just shift between countries, it kind of leaks away from them altogether. Can you imagine non-governmental organizations, NGOs, getting a vote at the UN, just like a country? The idea here is that networks of activists, supercharged by technology and public anger, could literally seize the global agenda from governments that are too slow to act.
Okay, for our last story, we have a crisis, a big one. China and India are on the brink of conflict over critical energy shipping lanes. So, in this chaotic future, who steps in to solve it? It's not who you'd think.
That's right, Brazil. This story is the ultimate vision of that multipolar world. A rising power from the global south becomes the key peacemaker, hosting talks that the old superpower, the US, couldn't manage. It's a world turned completely upside down.
You know, looking back from where we are now, it's pretty amazing how much this 2008 report got right about the direction the world was heading. It painted a picture of a world in flux, and it left us with a really powerful question that feels more relevant than ever. As we live through this transformed world, are we the ones in control, or are we just reacting to forces that have gotten too big to manage?